Welcome to an episode of One Bottle, Three Questions with myself, Mike Best, and Nelson Parry. Today we are joined by Simon Lawson, the Managing Director of Casella Family Estates Europe. And for those of you who don't know, they have a very important brand, Yellowtail. So the wine we have in our glass today is the 2024 Yellowtail Shiraz. Simon, this is a big question applicable to many brands, but how do you build and maintain customer relationships with a wine brand which is a household name?
Thank you, Mike. Very, very good to be here, and very good to have a chance to talk to you guys. Household name. I think that's an interesting start point actually, because I think we still got a little bit of way to go, notwithstanding our position in the market. Um, I would judge. I would judge a household name to be something that would have a very high level of unprompted recall by consumers. Yellowtail has a high recall in wine terms at 25%, but in relation to a kind of what I would see as a household name, we need to be up way above 30%, something like that, 30, 40%. So we have a bit of a way to go. But having said that, the question is how we build our way to that, I think is interesting. And let me take you back to kind of 2001 when Yellowtail was launched originally in the United States. Um, John Casella, who is the patriarch, if you like, of the business, wanted to find a way to export and basically came up with the concept of Yellowtail. And the idea was that he would create a wine that was um, playing on simplicity, playing on very straightforward, delicious, fruit-driven taste, affordable, but marketed in a way that was fun, lively, and had that kind of Australian image, if you like, hence the colourful kangaroo on the label. Um, Actually, it was written up in a book called Blue Ocean Strategy, which I'd recommend you have a read of, actually, because what it does is it kind of highlights how Yellowtail positioned itself away from, if you like, the competition at the time. What Blue Ocean talks about is you want to avoid a red ocean, which is a shark infested, blood infested, high competition area, and you want to find blue ocean, which is kind of clear blue space that you can grow into. And Yellowtail, I think, in its initial launch, very much had that. So what was originally, I think, a plan for 2001 being 25,000 cases ended up the brand sold 1 million cases in America. Um, it was launched in the UK around about the same sort of time. I first came across it oddly funnily enough, in Canada in 2008, and I was really struck by how vibrant the display was. What great brand it was for visibility, and I spent a couple of years trying to persuade John that he should give the distribution rights to the company I worked for at the time, Percy Fox, and eventually he did. And we took the brand from very small in the UK up to around about 1 million cases by 2015. And in 2015, Percy Fox, which was part of Diageo at the time, was sold to Treasury Wine Estates, actually, as it turned out. But as a result of that, we set up the Casella business in Europe to basically look after John's interests, and particularly Yellowtail. So we've been running as an operation since 2016. 9 years later, the brand in the UK is now worth 3.5 million cases. So it's
Those are cases of 12 as well, is that right?
cases of 12, yeah, yeah. And if I was to put that into retail value, we've taken it from about 70 million pounds worth of retail value to 290. So actually, in its own right, it's a pretty seismic brand. It's pretty sizable. And the way we've kind of done that is, I guess, we've been very consistent in our approach to the market. We've had, and the team I've got, I've always had very strong relationships with the retail world, and that takes us a long way. And we have to be very thankful and grateful for the support we've had from the big retailers in taking this brand to where it is today. Um, I guess part of the sort of key attributes of the brand are the fact that because of its packaging, it is easy to find. It is also incredibly easy to drink, as you will have discovered, as you know, and as a result, it's we tend to term it as easy to enjoy as well. So that recognition, the ability to be able to find the wine time and time again, actually in a kind of sea of complexity in the supermarket world, I think is very, very powerful. Um, and the wine itself is soft. It's easy style. It's very consistent. It's reliable, and we're building up quite a base of fans of it. And so we've got people that buy it regularly. We get a lot of commentary back from consumers actually. And one of the things that we've done is, despite the size, I mean, to be fair, the Casella business in Europe is only 30 odd people, but it could be perceived as a big corporate. And so what we try and do is to keep it very down to earth. We listen very carefully to what consumers say. Any inquiry or complaint or feedback we get, my PA answers personally, and it's amazing actually the response that has had just through the way she deals with customers. She actually had me personally deliver a couple of bottles to a consumer one day. Because I think if I remember rightly, there was a relatively old lady who was struggling with the screw caps, and she rang up and said, "I'm struggling. Can you do something about it?" So Debs, my PA, said, "Simon, go and sort her out." So I took a couple of bottles around, showed how to open it, and I think she's a fan for life.
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, showing the human touch to a large brand is a lesson that I think is very valuable. And what about the marketing campaigns or the way that you've sort of engaged with the consumers that way? How have they gone for you, or what are the things that you thought about with regards to that?
I think there are three dimensions to our kind of marketing. One is that we have been consistently investing in marketing actually since we set the Casella business up. So you will find us on TV on a fairly regular basis. We put a lot of money into that. We're putting a lot of money into social increasingly now. So Facebook, Instagram in particular. And that's beginning to really broaden, if you like, the engagement we're getting with consumers, which is really, really important. I guess, the thing that I've learned over time is that we've got ourselves to a place where people, consumers, wine drinkers, kind of love Yellowtail because it tastes great, it's consistent, it's reliable, it's good value. But actually, what we're trying to do now is to build much more of an emotional engagement to it, so that we can kind of elevate the brand a little bit out of the category. It becomes more of a stronger connection with consumers, and that, I think, we're just in the process of creating a new campaign, which should hit the airways in May. And I think you will see there some advertising that is very different from anything that's gone in wine before. And then the other thing that we do is we regularly get in front of consumers at events like, say, the BBC Good Food Show, and that really gives us a kind of sense for what the general public are thinking about wine, what they're thinking about our wines, what they like or don't like about what we're doing, and we get a lot of feedback from that.
Could you give us an example maybe of something that you've heard from a consumer at an event? Because, I imagine you're looking at a big number data. You mentioned the fact that you know that you have a sort of 25% recall as a household name, so you're not quite as maybe well known as Fairy Liquid or something like that. But outside of those numbers, from the sort of emotional connection and those anecdotal evidence, what's an example of something that you've taken or a lesson there?
I think probably the biggest one actually was the advent, if you like, of what we call, well, what the wine jammy red roux, which was developed with the idea that actually a sweeter red could actually make, a significant difference in the industry. Um, one of the things that we struggled a little bit with was kind of understanding how consumers were going to react to it. And we took it to the BBC Good Food Show. This would have been about 5, 6 years ago, I think. And one of the things that we kept coming back to was a lot of people were saying, actually, I don't drink red wine. I don't like red wine. And so what we did was we said, well, actually, try this. Close your eyes, just try this. Tell me what you think. And the reaction has been extraordinary, actually. It really has. And we've seen people that would definitively look at red wine and say no. I'll only want white, and this has really opened the game big time. So in kind of 5 years or so, we're now up to pretty close to 500,000 cases of jammy red roux, and it's interesting because the consumers love it so much they will talk about jammy roux or many of them actually just call it Jimmy roux. Uh, and that's their prerogative. Why not? Exactly. So that's a great example of, I think, where we've learned to find something that really kind of resonates.
We wanted to know if outside of traditional markets, which maybe for you are Australia, UK, the US, and tell me if I'm missing something, where does the brand do well? Are there any broader lessons that you learn from these all different markets? Or there are like different strategies that you need to apply to be stronger, like in a main market that you have, or like a new market, compared to what you just told us, I would say.
Sure, sure. I mean, I think it's fair to say that outside the main markets, for us, so it's US, UK, Canada, and Australia are kind of the primary ones. Um, the other markets are still relatively small, actually. It's fair to say, and I think I'd probably break it down into kind of two chunks, probably, actually, thinking about it. Um, there's what I would call kind of mature markets. So Western Europe, I think, Scandinavia, kind of mature wine markets, and then kind of newer markets. So Asia, Central America, Africa, I guess, where in those markets we have quite a big share of Australia, but in the overall scheme of things, they're not huge markets. And I think what we find in the mature markets outside of the key ones is that it's hard yards, actually. Genuinely, it's pretty tough. Those markets are unbelievably competitive. Prices are very low. And actually, interestingly, there's a very subjective view to wine in the buying community. So the idea of pushing a kind of new world brand, and one that is very successful in some markets, actually is difficult. So we're relatively successful in Germany. We've had a little bit of success in Netherlands, but it's not really been as successful as ideally we'd like. If you then flip to kind of Asia, for example, where I think we have 20% of Australian wine in South Korea, we have 30% in the Philippines, we have 10% in Japan, give you an idea. There, I think it's a little bit easier because I think we are the trade is more engaged in the idea of brands. I think they're much more open to brands, and consumers likewise are looking for the reassurance of brands. I think specifically with Yellowtail, I think the style of wine actually appeals to those consumers. So taste is, the taste profile is very, very important there. And I think, the brand assets, if you like, what the brand looks like. Again, it's back to that easy to shop, easy to find piece, which is important. So I guess what I'd say is that, having a really great relationship with a distributor is important. And we're very lucky to have, top distributors who really understand their markets, and they really understand consumers, and they understand what it is that we're trying to do. So kind of we work in partnership with them, and we've had those relationships for many years. So that is helping to take us through. I think being focused on consumers is absolutely essential. You know, understanding what level they're at. It's very easy to overestimate consumers in these markets. And if on a scale of 10, 1 is zero knowledge and 8, 9, 10 is, well, 7 is probably my knowledge. You guys are probably nearer 9 or 10. Mike, you're definitely a 10. I say to people, actually, you've got to think in terms of 1 and 2 for consumers in these markets. And that, I think, is really impossible. The other thing I would say is that because clearly within that, China has been a really important part for Australia. And with the tariffs that were put, excuse the tariff word, but with the tariffs put onto Australia 4 or 5 years ago, those companies that were dependent on China really, really suffered. We've never had a big chunk of our business in China. So the lesson I take, the commercial lesson I take from that is, look, you don't ever want to be dependent on any one market in the same way as you don't want to be dependent on any one channel or ultimately one particular customer. So it's all about, making sure that your risk is spread. And I think that's, Yellowtail is available now in something like 70 countries globally. It's a really good spread that gives us a platform to continue to build on.
We're undergoing a big time of change in the wine world. There's quite a lot of nervous people, I guess, unsure about how the challenges of the next few years will be addressed, and they seem to be on the horizon. And I wanted to keep that question quite simple and ask you maybe a bit of a leading question, but do you think we suffer more from a lack of innovation or a lack of confidence in the wine world?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. The challenges are broad, no question. There's plenty of them. I guess for me, I think there's a question of what we can influence and what we can't influence. And the first place I would start is by saying, look, there are some things we've just got to accept are happening, and we've got to focus on what we can do. That's the first thing. But you're right. They are running at us at a rate of knots, and yesterday, Independence Day in or Liberation Day in the US is absolutely one of it. I think what these challenges do is throw up opportunities. And I think case in point, the duty regime that the UK has introduced has thrown up the opportunity to look at, how you gravitate towards lower ABV wine. Now, I think this is where kind of innovation and confidence. I think there's a really quite interesting juxtaposition, and I'll just give you our view on this one for the moment. For Yellowtail, the brand promise, why people buy the brand, is because of the quality of wine. It's because of the taste experience that they get. It's because of the consistency, and that is what they expect. I think we believe that to disrupt that, to go against that, is the wrong thing to do. People buy Yellowtail for a reason. And therefore, we are taking a very strong stance that says we're not going to reduce alcohol because we don't want to reduce the flavour. We don't want to give people a compromise. They don't want to compromise. Now, I'm pretty clear on that. That is what the brand stands for. Now, others can go the way that they want to go, by all means. That's entirely their prerogative. The one thing I would say, and I am a little bit concerned, is that by diluting the flavour of wine does tend to potentially undermine the category to some extent. And I am a bit concerned that in the longer run, we're going to see people turning away from wine because it doesn't taste as it did, because people have gone down the value route. And I'm concerned that, and for reasons I totally understand, because the link to production is so fundamental in this industry that if you've got product to sell, you've got to find a way of selling it. And I think, as people try and hit price points in order to sell volume, we are potentially undermining the longer term, which says to me we're lacking a little bit of confidence. And I think actually we should be looking for alternative ways of innovating. I think if we go down the lower alcohol route, I think we've got to start, from, I haven't really tasted anything that is particularly good. We're looking at it, of course we are. We've got winemakers experimenting and trying different things, but we won't introduce anything into this market until such point as we're happy that the quality delivers what consumers expect, or we find a way of circumnavigating that. But at the moment, the Yellowtail focus in the UK is 100% on great tasting, great quality wine. So I think, that there are other areas where I think, innovation has, we're good at innovating when it comes to, some of the stuff we're doing in sustainability is impressive as an industry. From our point of view, we've taken a huge amount out of glass weight by kind of lightweighting over time. We're now bottling everything for Europe is being bottled in the UK, so kind of that side of things. We have just opened, literally back end of last year, a new solar farm at our winery. I think it's 8,300 solar panels. We'll manage 35% of our energy at the main Casella winery. And there's a lot of work we're doing on in the vineyard. So in that sense, there's a lot of innovation going on, a lot of good stuff. I think when it comes to, trying to kind of bring new consumers in, finding new ways of broadening occasionality, I think I talked to you a little bit about Jammy Red, to try and bring more people into that sphere, if you like. We introduced a Jammy Rosé, which is going quite well. It's about a year and a bit old. That's going pretty well. We've got 80,000 cases going. And then last year we introduced a Jammy White, which may or may not be the right nomenclature for it, but it's done okay so far. And the idea of trying to broaden that consumer base, broaden the occasion base. Literally as of today, we've launched Yellowtail Prosecco in Sainsbury's, trying to add a little bit of value to that category, but also saying to Yellowtail consumers, look, you buy Prosecco, trust in Yellowtail, here we go. So what we're trying to do is to kind of build this ecosystem, if you like, for Yellowtail drinkers, that allows them to continue to stay with the brand and keep going with it. And within that, there's a degree of, not innovation as such, but more renovation. We've just launched a slight redesign of the label. So it's, if you kind of look at, I think, Nelson, you may have the new one with you. It's just a little bit sharper, a little bit classier, and a delicate evolution going on. So as an industry, I guess I would probably say we innovate a lot. There's a lot of new products always coming into the market, but I do think we probably should be more confident. Think about wine; it's endured for 8,000 years. It's not, in the UK, if you take the off and on trade, I think it's a £15 billion category. So it's not exactly small.
It's still the nation's favourite drink, and this is not prohibition. It's not the Second World War. It's not phylloxera. It's there's challenges, but it's Yeah, it's not insurmountable. Just to go back to the sustainability question, something that I've been thinking about, wondering how we deal with as an industry. What would your take be on, say, alternative packaging for Yellowtail? Because you have a well-known brand, and you would have the ability to say, we're going to launch this in a 1.5 litre pouch, or we're going to do a bag in box, or we're going to do an aluminium bottle. However, that obviously is fraught with quite a high degree of risk because it is as yet untested, unproven. There is a demand for increased sort of sustainable packaging, and obviously you mentioned the glass weights, but is the consumer there yet to take on a mainstream buy into a mainstream brand in that? It's chicken and egg, isn't it? If Yellowtail did it and it worked, then it would be sort of first to market in some ways, but equally there's a risk that consumers want it in their 75 centilitre glass bottle that they're used to buying in. So how do you see something like that for Yellowtail?
Yeah, it's a huge risk. I tell you, I go back to I had a conversation many years ago with Paul Walsh, who was CEO of Diageo, and we were talking about wine, and he left me with a phrase that stuck with me ever since, which is wine is an affordable luxury. And I then think about when wine is drunk, most of the occasions warrant a bottle. No question about that. Um, that's not to say cans or pouches or bag and box or whatever don't have a role to play. But for me, and maybe I'm a bit of a traditionalist, but the reality is I see wine as being something that people want to enjoy. And that is as much about the experience as it is the product. And the bottle is a fundamental part of the experience. Um, to the point about sustainability, I mean, in reality, glass is endlessly recyclable. The question is, how do you manage the energy? And we work in partnership with NSERC, both for glass and for bottling and distribution. And they've got huge ambitions to find a way of creating, ultimately, I think, moving to kind of green hydrogen furnaces, which will allow for the industry to be much more sustainable than perhaps it is at the moment. But that kind of ongoing permanent recyclability of glass, I think, is something that I would want to hold on to, and I would want to support all efforts to kind of reduce the energy consumption in making glass.
I think we're trying to give consumers, I mean, this is definitely true with the alcohol, reducing alcohol because of duty. The innovation which we're forcing upon them is not consumer driven. And so you can expect some uptake if it makes it cheaper, because obviously price conscious consumers make sense. But nobody's asking, well, very few people are asking for these sort of lower strength wines. And it's still the same in alternative packaging, that it's not really being demanded. It's just ideas that some people think that we should do and are exploring. So I suppose that's it for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean there's a number of brands that I can think of over the course of the years that have tried to expand into places that don't work for them, um, and they ain't the brands that they were. Um, and I was heavily involved with one of those actually, and so I've learned a lot of lessons in seeing how not to manage a brand, you know, which over time, as a brand growth slows and you become more mature, that's when it gets hard. The hard yards is how do you keep growing? Is it about volume or is it about value? And I think we're sort of edging in that space with Yellowtail. But to try and grow purely through innovation of product, I think is a massive risk, because you end up doing things that damage your brand equity. Um, so I'm a big exponent of kind of what I call 360-degree innovation, which is looking at ways to innovate beyond just product. And I think there will be a role for us. We have done bag in box previously. It wasn't hugely successful. We may well come back to that again. There's a little bit more momentum in that category, so we may well come back to that. Cans, actually, if we're really honest, we're a bit twitchy about quality issues and the impact on taste. And taste is, as you probably gathered by now, is fundamental to what we do. And if you talk to John Casella, it's the first thing he talks about is how well are we tasting, and that's really, really important. So I'm kind of we'll keep an open mind on it, but fundamentally, glass is the hero for me.
That was One Bottle, Three Questions with myself, Mike Best, and Nelson Parry. Today we were joined by Simon Lawson of Casella Estates, and the wine was the 2024 Yellowtail Shiraz. The three questions were how to build and maintain customer relationships with such a well-known wine brand. Question 2 was about the markets outside of the traditional areas like Australia, UK, US, and lessons from these markets. And question 3 was, do we suffer more from a lack of innovation or a lack of confidence in the world of wine? Simon, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much, guys.